Welcome to Block 9 of our Block of the Month 2022. This 24-inch finished block uses 4 fabrics: a background, a medium, a dark, and an accent. A downloadable version of the pattern is available in the Files section of our Facebook group called The Quilted Forest Friends. Or you can screenshot it and print it at home, or you may push pause and take notes. We will show it again at the end of the video. To help you keep track of which fabric is for which value, cut a small piece of the fabric and tape it next to what it will be used for. This helped me greatly, especially with my alternate colorways. But for now, it's time to cut. From the background fabric, cut one strip that is 4 inches by the width of fabric and one strip that is 3.5 inches by the width of fabric. From each of these strips, you will need to cut 8 squares. You will need 8 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches and 8 squares that are 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. From the medium fabric, cut 2 strips that are 4 inches by the width of fabric. From these strips, you will need to cut 12 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches. I'm cutting through 4 layers at once, so I will only need to make 3 cuts of 4 squares. From the dark fabric, cut 2 squares that are 4 inches by the width of fabric. From these 2 strips, you will need to cut 12 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches. Make sure that you hit that like button, subscribe, and sign up for notifications so that you see all of our Block of the Month videos. From the accent fabric, cut 1 square that is 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. After you've cut your large 12.5-inch square, cut a strip that is 4 inches by the width of fabric and cut a strip that is 3.5 inches by the width of fabric. From each of these strips, cut 4 squares, 4 that are 4 inch by 4 inch and 4 that are 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. I've picked some really fun fabrics for my bright fabrics on a black background version and my red, white, and blue version. I've got them cut and ready to sew. On the wrong side of all of the background 4-inch squares, all of the 4-inch accent squares, and 6 of the medium 4-inch squares, draw one line corner to corner. If you do not want to draw the lines, you could use diagonal seam tape for the next step instead. Place 4 of the background 4-inch squares onto 4 of the dark 4-inch squares with right sides together. I take time to get all of my 4-inch square sets ready to sew so I can work on them all at the same time. You are always going to be putting right sides together and only using the 4-inch squares. You need to put 6 dark squares with 6 medium squares, 4 background squares with 4 medium squares, 2 dark squares with 2 accent squares, and 2 medium squares with 2 accent squares. Once you have all your square sets put together, you need to sew a 1/4 inch away from the corner to corner line on both sides of the line. I'm going to use the diagonal seam tape to help me sew these lines that are a 1/4 inch away from the center line. All you have to do is follow the corner of the squares with one of the black lines. Either side will work. The diagonal seam tape is one of my favorite tools to use when I have to do this kind of sewing. It just makes everything go much smoother. Once you have sewn up on one side, take them off on the machine, use your Blade Saver thread cutter to cut them apart, and send them through again. This handy little tool saves me so much time, I love it. Round 2 of sewing 1/4 inch away from the center line. Now it's time to cut them apart and cut them between the lines. You can use a scissors to cut them apart. I like to take them over to my cutting mat and use my ruler so that I don't make any mistakes and accidentally cut into my sewing seams. Once they're cut apart, it's time to press. For the 4 units that use medium and accent fabric, press to the accent fabric. All of the rest of them will be pressed towards the medium or the dark, whichever is the darkest fabric. I'm still working on my red, white, and blue version and my bright fabrics on a black background version. Lots of half square triangles to make. Now it's time to trim all of these half square triangles to 3.5 inches square. I like to use my block lock ruler because it's got the little channel on the block. I can put the seam allowance in the channel and it just helps keep everything nice and tidy. I lock the seam in the center, I trim 2 sides, I spin it around and then line it up on the 3.5 inch markings and trim the other 2 sides. Oversizing these squares and cutting them down may take a little extra time, but the fact that they are just perfect when you're done makes it worth it. Once all of these squares have been trimmed, it's time to put the units together into blocks that we will make the big block out of. Piece using 1/4 inch seam allowances. You will make 4 each of the following units from the half square triangle blocks. They will measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. This is where my color key came in handy, helping me to identify the right pieces. Start with the medium dark and dark background half square triangle units. Sewing the dark pieces together, those dark pieces should point in opposite directions. Once those are sewn, work on the accent medium and medium background half square triangle units. Make sure the medium fabric is going next to the medium fabric. Cut them apart, but keep the pile together. And now it's time to work on the next set. You're going to do the accent in dark with the dark in the background, keeping the dark fabrics together. And then it's the medium with the dark and then the medium with the background. Keep the medium fabrics together as you sew. Cut those apart, but keep that stacked together. Next, you need to sew a background square to each of these units. Make sure you're sewing the background square to the dark fabric. Once we're done sewing the accent to the background pieces, it's time to take everything to the ironing board for pressing. For the first set that you sewed, press away from the accent and then toward the medium on the other half. I like to press from the back side because I think it gives me a little more control over where the seams are going. For the second set that you sewed together, you're going to press towards the accent fabric with the dark fabrics, and then the other one you are going to press towards the background fabric. For the last set that you sewed together, it's easiest just to press both of them toward the background square. Now it's time to sew these sets together. Make sure you sew them exactly as shown. If you press correctly, these seams should fit together quite nicely and nest. You will make 4 each of the following units. They will each measure 6.5 inches when pressed. I had to keep checking my fabric key and consulting my pattern to make sure I was sewing these units correctly. You don't want to make a mistake and have to get the ripper out. Now it's time to press these units. You can press either direction or open if you prefer. I made it easy on myself and just kind of pressed toward the accent piece with each of the units. Next, it's time to sew the pieces that have the accent triangles together. These triangles should face each other and touch, and you want to make sure that this seam in the center is nesting. The seam at the top, they will both go in one direction, but it shouldn't be too bad to sew through. Once you have them sewn, you can press to either direction or open if preferred. Now the block is finally coming together. You can lay out your pieces. You have the corner pieces, 2 on each end, and then the side pieces on either side of the big square that you cut earlier. You will make 2 of the top and bottom rows and 1 of the center rows. Make sure that the corner pieces are properly positioned. You should have like fabric being sewn to like fabric, so dark with dark and medium with medium. The accent fabrics in the center should be making a point. Piece the large rectangles onto opposite sides of the center square. Once sewn, you're going to press towards the center square. Piece the corner squares onto opposite ends of the other 2 rectangles. These seams won't be nesting together like our other seams. Pinning will prevent the seams from shifting as you sew. Always double check as you sew these units together to make sure that you have the corner pieces positioned correctly. Once you have both corners sewn onto the rectangle, you are going to press towards the corner units. Just 2 seams left and this block is done. I highly recommend pinning the sides to the center unit before sewing it on. It'll keep everything from shifting as you sew. When you're done, you're going to want to press towards the center unit. I used a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press spray to help my seam be a little more cooperative. This block should measure 24.5 inches by 24.5 inches and will be 24 inches square in the quilt. I think my block turned out gorgeous, and here are my alternate colorways, the bright fabrics on the black background and my red, white, and blue version. I hope you enjoyed making today's block. We hope you will hit that like button, leave a comment, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!